Hello there. Welcome back to the English Language Club. It is the 9th of June and it's a Tuesday, which means it's time for another live stream. I can see we've got 5 people watching already. That's great.
That's exciting.
Yeah. Lolly is back, one of our regular watchers, regular listeners. Hello there. You're very welcome. So, yes, if you don't know, if you're watching this for the first time, my name is Colin Munro, and this is my very good friend, Tony Kulpa.
Hello.
So, Tony, how are you doing? Have you had a good week?
Oh, yeah, it's been a very nice week here. How about you?
I've had an exhausting week, but this is always a highlight of my week, doing this live stream with you guys. So I'm very glad and happy to be here. I feel great. I feel the best I have done for a long time. So good. So yeah, great. We've also got AJ in Monaco. Hello, AJ. How are you doing? Another one of our regulars. We've got 10 people watching now, so say hi.
Oh, wow.
Let us know where you are, where you're from, who you are. And let's get the questions coming in. What do you have you got any questions about learning English? So for those of you who aren't familiar with the format, these are very informal, just kind of hangouts. Tony and I just answer any questions that come along. We are we are together developing an online course at the moment, which is going to be called Inside English, which is focusing on the tenses and how we form tenses. And what we've done is we've got a slightly different angle to look at it from what we would normally teach, or the way that people normally learn about the tenses, if they have learned from in like school or from textbooks and things. Yeah, now one of the key ideas in the course is going to be how every tense, they all follow the rules, but every tense has got something very weird about it. I noticed when I was sort of teaching classes. So I'll start by talking a little bit about that. But before I do, we've got a couple of more people with some comments. Lassen says, "I like your beard, Mr. Tony."
I do too. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. How long have you been growing that now?
Well, I mean, I've had it for 12 years. Yeah.
Okay. But how long before it got to that size? Is that the longest it's ever been, or have you cut it back?
Oh, no. I've cut it back several times. Yeah. So how many years of growth it is, I don't know. Maybe I don't know, because I cut it so.
And Mishan is asking rigmarole. What's the meaning?
Do you mean rigmarole? That's actually one of my favorite odd word histories, actually. So we can come back to it.
We'll come back to. Shall I talk about the? Yeah, I'll just talk a little bit. Let's talk a little about the tenses, and then we'll.
But let me know, Mishan, if you mean rigmarole, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So, for example, the present, let's say the present simple tense. It's often taught as like the first tense, being the most simple because it's called simple, although it's not really that simple. One of the weird things about the present simple tense is the S form of the verb in the third person. So you say, I walk, you walk, we walk, they walk. But if it's third person singular, we say he walks, Tony walks. It has that S on the end. I don't know why. Do you know why? Is there a reason? I don't think it doesn't matter whether there's a reason or not. The point is that's a weird thing, and there's not. If there is a reason, it doesn't really matter what the reason is. It's just something weird you have to remember.
True, and what it is actually is it used to be there were different forms for all of those. And what has happened in English, and this is actually pertinent to our study of Inside English, because in many languages, especially Romance languages and languages based on Greek, so Eastern European, Slavic languages, and Middle Eastern languages, I'm not as familiar with African or South Asian languages. But a lot of languages, the way tense works is the verb itself changes for every different possible use. And in English, that used to be the case a long time ago, and slowly the number of main verb changes has gotten smaller and smaller over the years, to where now one of our big ideas for this course is that really, if you want to understand tense, instead of looking at the changes in the main verb, you look at the auxiliary verb, because that's where all of those changes have moved to. And the weird thing is that that third person S form has just somehow clung on and not disappeared the way all the other forms have.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's one of the weird things about the present simple tense. And then another one in the past simple tense, in the regular form, we do change the form of the verb. We to the ed form. That's the regular way of making a past simple. However, you would think that ed is pronounced ed, right? But it's never.
Sounds like it.
But it's never pronounced ed. There's three ways that it can be pronounced. 3 ways, and none of them are ed. It can be. No. It can be. Just d, like loved, love, and loved. It can be like a T sound, like I walked or I thanked. Or it can be id, like I've got an example written here, funded.
Yes,
funded.
Or needed, yes.
Needed.
Id, not ed.
Yes.
Id,
yeah. I guess that's the most confusing one. That's the one where people are going to want to say ed. But it's not ed, it's id. It's never ed, which is really weird.
It is very strange.
And that's the whole point here. There's something weird about every tense. So let's talk about the continuous tense. I mean, the continuous tenses are the most regular and the most easy to learn. Despite the name, the present simple and past simple, they're not actually that simple. Whereas the present continuous is very regular. Even irregular verbs are formed with ing in the same way. But I guess one of the weird things about the present continuous is that it can be used to talk about the future. So you say, I am walking, or I'm walking to work. That means I'm walking to work right now. But if I say I'm walking to work tomorrow, then now I'm talking about the future. So even though it's present continuous, it can be used to talk about the future with a time reference, which
is frequently, very frequently.
Yeah. So all these weird things, they confuse tense, and they're all very different. Completely different things for each tense. And although it's good to know what they are, I think the course Inside English is more about peeling those things back and looking at what's left underneath. So what are the rules? Because I think a lot of students, they want rules. They want to know, how do you form tense? How do we use tense? And it's very difficult because of all these layers on top. And that's what Inside English is going to be all about.
And frequently when you're learning tenses, especially when you're learning more, trying to take your English level to more advanced, what you wind up getting is you get this long list of all the different situations or different ways that each of the tenses can be used. And because there are so many of these little tiny things that are different about each tense, if you're memorizing it as a long list of things, it's a major pain. It's a lot of individual things to memorize. And so what we really believe is that if you start at kind of a center, that deepest layer, that's actually very simple. It makes a lot of sense.
Which is to do with the auxiliary verbs. I mean, that's what we're talking about.
Yes. Yeah. And so if you start at that simple point and then you learn the different pathways out of it instead of just learning a list of unconnected rules. If you start from the center, everything is connected, and you can remember as you go through this tense or this tense, things change a little bit. We think that it really helps, makes tense make sense, is what we're saying. Yeah.
That's our goal, to make tense make sense. So so let's go back to the comments now.
So ask us your questions. Let us know where you're listening from. We're always excited to have people from all over the world.
Yeah, we've got a few more people watching now. And so Mission says yes. So rigmarole, I think she's saying
Rigmarole.
So rigmarole is the word. What does rigmarole mean?
So a rigmarole means something that is too complicated. It's unnecessarily complicated. And the word actually comes from back in the day of sailing ships. If you wanted to get somebody in trouble, what you would do is you would come up with a long, complicated list of complaints against them, and they would come and they would read this complaint out, and then people would have to take different actions to deal with it. And it was called I think it was called a ragman's roll, because it was on a scroll, like on a roll of paper or parchment or something. And so it was basically a lot of complicated stuff to waste people's time. And that's where now we call it a rigmarole. So a big rigmarole is when some process is way too complicated, way more complicated than it needs to be, usually to waste time. Yeah.
Great. You see, now this is why we have Tony here. Tony is like one of the smartest and most knowledgeable people that I've ever met. So I didn't know any of that about the history of the word rigmarole. So yeah. We're very lucky to have you here, and I'm very lucky to have you as a friend, Tony.
I like reading 17th century literature.
Okay. Lolly says, I'm very confused with the verb need. For example, needn't and I don't need. So I don't think you're really confused with the verb need. I think you're confused with contractions.
Well, is the question, is this about the difference between I don't have to or I have to, right? The negative of the modal for need or have. This is something you've talked about a lot. We can talk about both, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I guess need is a complicated verb, because you can follow it by a infinitive. I need to go, I need to walk, I need to live.
And many languages in English, when you say I need to do something, that means that you must do it. It is necessary. But when you say I don't need to do something, you're not saying that to not do it is necessary, that you can't do it. It means that you can do it or you cannot do it, but it's optional. So to not need something or not have to do something doesn't mean the same as the opposite of you have to do something or you need to do something. That's something that's come up a few times in our live streams.
Yeah, but I think what Lolly's getting at is the fact that you can use the contraction in some cases, whereas normally we only do that with auxiliary verbs.
Yes.
So and the main auxiliary verbs for forming tense are to be, to have, and to do.
Yes.
But there are other types of auxiliary verb, and
there are actually lots of auxiliary verbs in English.
Yeah,
lots of them. Maybe at least like a dozen or so.
Right, but those three are the most important because we use them to make tense. Yes. But then the others are, am I correct in saying all the others are what we would call modal auxiliary verbs?
I would generally call them modal. There are a few different ones, yeah. Yeah,
and those are used to talk about permission and obligation and possibility. So in this case, need, that would come under obligation. Yes. So yeah, with that you can you can use the contraction. So another example would be,
because it is an auxiliary verb.
Yeah,
it is an auxiliary verb, and every auxiliary verb changes the auxiliary verbs that come after it and can act as auxiliary verbs. It's just not one of the main auxiliary verbs that we use to form tense.
Yes. Now you say it's an auxiliary verb, but what I think we should clarify that it's an auxiliary verb in some contexts. It can be used as an auxiliary verb, but it isn't always.
The same is true of all auxiliary verbs, right? Like I do my homework, or I am doing my homework. Do is the main verb, right? Yeah. I have a headache. Have is the main verb.
Yeah.
I am Tony Kulpa. be is the main verb. All verbs, all auxiliary verbs can be main verbs as a general rule.
So in the sentence, I need food, that's the main, need is the main verb. But in the sentence, I need to go, is that would be the main verb again then, wouldn't it?
Yes, that would still be that would still probably be the main verb.
What would be an example with it as an auxiliary verb?
Like I need not listen to this. For instance.
So that's a negative again. So you could say I needn't. Can you can that be used in a positive? I can't
think of an example off the top of my head, but that doesn't mean that it can't be.
But I guess that's what makes it unusual. Like the fact that we can't think of an example off the top of our heads, that means that we don't use this very much, which is why it's confusing for people learning English as a second language.
Yes.
Miriam says, hi from Buenos Aires in Argentina. Hello. In fact, Tony and I met in South America. You've been to
yes, Buenos Aires
Argentina?
As well.
Yeah, I haven't actually myself, but I would like to go.
One of my favorite trips I've ever taken was to Ushuaia. It was very, very nice.
Mm-hmm. So what are some other modal auxiliary verbs that people might encounter? By the way, keep these comments coming in. We've got 16 people watching, I think. So, say hi. Let us know where you're from. And if you've got any questions, let us know. That's what we're here for. And, of course, don't forget to hit the like button. Give us a thumbs up. So, no, Lolly's just saying crystal clear explanation.
Great.
Thank you. But let's talk about some other
modal verbs,
modal auxiliary verbs. So might is a common one. So one of the reasons we have modal auxiliary verbs is to talk about possibility or probability. So something might happen.
So you've got might, could, must.
No, those would be obligation. Could, must.
Could is possibility, must or shall is obligation,
And they're a little bit unusual with the way that things are structured afterwards, because you could say, I might go to the shops tomorrow, or you might say, no, hang on, I must.
So some of these modal verbs wind up being in what's called an infinitive construct.
Yeah.
I don't know if we've talked about the infinitive before. We talked about gerunds versus participles and continuous forms of main verbs, but I don't know if we've talked about infinitives as much. In English, an infinitive is a verb that has the word to before it. So, I like to eat, right?
Yeah. Now, hang on. Before you go any further, I've definitely seen some inconsistency in different textbooks and things regarding this. I've seen the infinitive. Sometimes you see just the verb. So, like for example, to walk. I would call that the infinitive, and then I would call walk on its own. I would call that the base form. And then walks, walked. Those are all the the other forms. Walking. But I have seen, just the base form referred to as the infinitive, and then the to walk referred to as the to infinitive.
So this is really a question of like where you pin down the like where you start from. The base form is almost universally the infinitive form of the verb, and to is a construct. It's how we use the infinitive. Is with the word to. Base form and infinitive form are the same thing. They're two different names for the same thing. But I've seen that too, whether people argue like the word to and the base form together make the infinitive, or the infinitive is just the base form, but then when you use it, you add to on it. But it really is a chicken or the egg thing. Yeah.
I tend to prefer to call the infinitive to walk.
To walk, yes.
Because then I found, but that might just be because my second language is Spanish, And when you translate things into Spanish or from Spanish, it translates more directly when you use the infinitive form from Spanish. Like quiero comer would be I want to eat. So comer is not eat, it's to eat. So I think
eating,
that
yes.
Yeah. So that makes more sense to me. But if you're for other teachers who've got different second languages, then it might not necessarily be the same logic. So
well, it really is. The difference is to eat is not a form of a verb. It is a construct. It's multiple words together. For instance, the continuous form of a verb is not just the ing. Like running by itself is not. That is the ing form, but it is not the present continuous. You have to say am running, right, or are running, right, and that's a construct. The verb with necessary words that go along with it. So the proper form and the proper auxiliaries or other things. So in order to form the infinitive construct, like how we actually use the infinitive, you need the base form or the infinitive form. It's the same thing, and the word to, right?
Yeah. Great. Well, we've got a few more comments now. We skipped over a quick comment from Pro, who just gave us some hearts. So
hello.
Thank you for the love. Let's see. We got Fio from Burma. Hello, Fio again. Another regular. And Princess. Hello. Lolly has another comment. It may happen and it might happen. Same meaning?
Yeah.
It may happen, it might happen.
I
think yes, happen. Same meaning. But if I was to say, I think so. May and might are both modal auxiliary verbs to do with possibility. I would suggest that maybe may happen means there's a bit less probability than it might happen.
On a literal level,
what do you think?
On a literal level, may means it is possible. Like it's I should say it's allowed to happen. There's an old joke in about people who are particularly strong on forcing people to use proper grammar. That if a student asks, can I get up or can I change chairs? The students say, well, I hope you are able to, but you may, because can asks, are you able to do something? May asks, are you allowed to do something? But in all practicality, those two are the same thing. Like, are you able to do something? Or can you do it? Or are you allowed to do something? Both of them are just asking, is it possible? And that's the lowest form of potential, of possibility, is it possible? So may just means that something is possible, right? So it may happen means it's possible, right? It might happen means that you think that there are reasonable ways that it could actually happen, right? Now, sometimes we use them the same, but yes, you're right. May has, by default, a lower kind of chance of happening. But for the most part, they're really used very much the same. Might is much more common in sort of normal English than may. May has kind of been falling out over the years.
Yeah, I mean that's very, very. If you use that now, it'd be very, very formal. May I go now, or something, But yeah, and so when people say, "Can I?" Like you said, if I said, "Can I go now?" It's like, well, yes, you can, but you're not allowed to. That's just being that's being very pedantic. And
it's just being silly.
Yeah, it's being silly because an old-fashioned. Because in reality, nowadays in modern speak, can is not just about ability. It's about it's also about permission as well.
Yes, and AJ is pointing out that may is formal, and it's used in formal letters or in legal documents and things like that. And may is still used in English, but not nearly as much as it used to be.
And it tends to be it tends to be the case that old-fashioned things that are falling out of everyday use, when they are used, that tends to be more formal.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Right. Gaspar says hello. Hello to you
Good to see
in
you,
Brazil.
Gaspar.
Another one of our regulars. So, yeah, now I've got a quick question. This came up in one of my classes that I did today.
Yeah.
Weary and wary.
Ah.
Now,
Yes.
they're the same word, right? It's just a different way of pronouncing it.
No. Wary is a different word, I believe.
Yeah? So what's the difference
Yes.
in meaning?
Well, wary means that you're cautious, and weary means that you're tired.
Yeah,
So they're
yeah.
not really they're very similar concepts. They might have the same root. I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, they're different words. I believe so. Yeah. So yeah, to be wary of something means that you're suspicious or you are cautious about it. It can mean to go slowly, warily.
Yeah, warily.
Yeah.
But I think that just means to go and be tired. But
No, not wearily. Wearily and warily are, again, would be two different words. Wearily means you're doing it and you're being tired about it. Warily means you're doing it and you're being cautious about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Because there are words where a slight change in the pronunciation like that, yeah, it changes the meaning. Like
Yes.
Produce and produce.
Yes.
Then it's just a case of stress. The word, the stress is on a different vowel.
It is, yes.
And it changes from being either the verb to produce to the noun produce, the things that you actually produce.
Now, wary is spelled differently. Wary doesn't have an E. It's just W-A-R-Y.
Right, yeah.
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 But yes, and this is not as common in English as it is in some languages, that very small differences in pronunciation wind up being different words. It does still happen quite a bit, but in many languages this is extremely common, right? However, in English it does tend to be a difference. So, for instance, Fio is asking the difference between the word maybe and may be, two separate words. So sometimes you'll see this difference in stress being the difference between, for instance, a single word or a compound word like this, or the difference between a word being used as a verb and a noun, like produce versus produce, right? If the stress is kind of at the end of the word, it's more often being used as a verb, right? To produce something, right, as to make it. Whereas produce is the noun, and that's the result, something that has been made. Although usually for all, it also like farm vegetables and things like that, produce.
Yeah.
Right?
And sometimes we talk about supermarkets having a produce aisle.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So the difference between maybe and may be, I mean, honestly, I don't think that they're as related as it sounds, because maybe is a question of possibility, like something is maybe true, whereas may and be is an actual verb construct. It's a modal verb and a verb.
Two separate words, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So maybe, maybe, that may be is the same as saying that might be, or almost the same, yeah. Whereas
that's
maybe
a verb. That's an actual, you would say that as part of a sentence, right? Like, that may be true, but you can't say that may be true with using maybe as one word, because maybe is not a verb by itself, right?
You could say maybe that is true.
Yes, maybe that is true, right? So maybe is kind of tacked on extra, whereas maybe is actually be would actually be the main verb there, and may is a modal. Right?
Yeah. Great. Well, keep the questions coming in. We've got 13, 14 people watching, according to the numbers that I can see. And we've had 10 likes, so thank you very much for giving us a thumbs up. And if you haven't done that already, please do. We really appreciate it. So we started off talking about the strange things about each tense. Yes. So maybe we can go back to that. So we talked about the present simple having the S form. That's one of the things that's strange. And the past simple having the ED form, and the even though it's quite regular, apart from the irregular verbs, but the pronunciation is very strange. Sometimes it's pronounced ch, sometimes it's pronounced d, sometimes it's pronounced
Mhm.
id. So what would be one of the strange things about the perfect tense? Or let's
Well,
say present perfect.
oh man, the present perfect tense is by far the most complicated tense in English, I think. At
Right.
least of our set ones. Maybe even including all of the supposedly the more complicated ones.
Yeah.
The
Well,
really
it's more complicated in the sense that it's used in lots of different ways.
yes, exactly.
Right. Where
The forming it is
not in
not
its grammar.
necessarily.
Yeah, not from its grammar. So you could have a very complicated tense. You could have like one of an example I like to give of like a very complicated tense form is the house had been being built in 1950. The house had been being built for 1 year.
Yes.
I don't know what tense that would be. Past,
Yeah.
perfect, passive, continuous.
Past perfect,
Yeah,
continuous.
passive, past perfect. Yeah. So there you've got like
Ridiculous.
4 auxiliary verbs relating to the tense. So we're not talking about that kind of complication. Just the present simple on its own. I have lived.
Yes. Well, I mean,
can
the
mean
obvious
different things.
is the fact that it is a present tense, but it sounds like you're talking about the past, and
In some ways,
and
you
that's
are talking about the past.
and that well, and I think this is an important distinction. You're talking about the present, but the action is in the past, and that I
Yeah.
think is the key distinction here. And
that's
because
what
the present, the
yeah.
time of action is about what moment you're talking about, not what moment the action happened, right? Now, in the simple, those two are the same because the simple doesn't have any extra information. But in the perfect, you're saying, I'm talking about the present perfect, I'm talking about the present, but this action happened in the past. But the fact that I'm talking about the present means I'm not really talking about the action, I'm talking about the action's results.
Yeah.
Because the action's already finished. Right?
Exactly.
And that's a pretty powerful quirk, but if you don't see that if you're not looking at that from the point of view of time of action being the past, present, or future, and that's what time you're talking about, and the type of action, which is simple or perfect or continuous, which actually tells you when the action happened or is happening, then that becomes a really difficult exception. Like suddenly the present perfect really doesn't make any sense. And that's, I think, why people find there's 2 reasons. That's one reason that people find the present perfect so difficult. The other is obviously it's used for a lot of different things.
Yeah. So, for example, we're saying that it's present because we're talking about the result now of something of an action in the past. So a very clear example of that would be something like, I have lost my keys. So right now I don't have my keys because I have lost them. That's present perfect.
So what you're talking about is the present and the fact that you don't have your keys.
At some point in the past I lost them, so now I don't have them. But I could also use present perfect to say something like, I've been to New York. Mm-hmm. And then it's sort of, well, yeah, you're talking about now and the action that you went to New York. But the action you went to New York, that's in the past, it's finished. What's the result now? Well, you are still talking about just the result that now you have that memory, you have that experience.
Yes, the familiarity.
So it's a very different form of result. And that's where the confusion comes. But if you break it down to there being a result now, even though it's a very different type of result, it can still be present perfect. So that's the weird thing about the present perfect.
Yes. And then some of them are clustered. So, for instance, the past perfect, the future perfect, and to a lesser extent, the past continuous and future continuous all have one quirk that I find very interesting, and it's that they're not usually used on their own. So, for instance, take example the past perfect. You don't often hear in a sentence or in a paragraph kind of by itself, I had done something, right? You hear it with a past simple. So I was, that's past simple, hungry because I hadn't eaten, right? Past perfect. or in example with future, or future continuous. Don't or I won't be at home tonight because that's future simple. I will not be at home tonight because I will be visiting a friend. That's future continuous, right? And so these tenses, these past and future of both continuous and perfect, you don't see them by themselves all that often. The odd time you do, but most of the time you see them paired with a future simple in the case of future, or a past simple in the case of past.
Yeah. So we often give say something in one tense, like it was raining when I arrived. So we're sort of giving context to an action.
Yes.
So that's why they're sometimes called the narrative tenses, because they're used to sort of tell stories and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
those are interesting ones. Those tenses are not as commonly used, and they have a much narrower field of how they are used. Like the simple tenses are used for a lot of different things. The present perfect is used for a lot of different things. The present continuous especially is used for a lot of different things. But the past perfect and past continuous and the future perfect and the future continuous are relatively narrow. They're pretty much the vast majority of the time, they're just used paired with a simple tense, either past for past or future for future, to provide context to the situation. And that's really good, because even though those tenses seem like they should be more complicated, the reality is that they are a little bit simpler because their use case is narrower. Yeah.
Great. Well, we're not getting a lot of comments today, which is unusual. So if you have got any questions, don't be shy. If it's your first time here, let us know. Say hello. And if you've got any questions, please, go ahead and answer. We have got one question from somebody called Cove of Pentagrams, who we haven't seen before. So hello there. You're very welcome.
Yes.
Now, you are asking, what is a good way to teach pronunciation? Well, one of the things that I think is absolutely key to pronunciation is the physical way that we're saying the sound. Okay.
Yes, the structure, the way you move your mouth.
Yeah.
And keeping very careful awareness of where the different parts of your mouth are.
Yeah. So we have phonetics, and I'm just going to show the phonetic chart. So we'll lose Tony for a second. The phonetic chart is very useful. I'll briefly explain how this works. So we've got the vowels in the green and the diphthongs in red, and then we've got consonants down in blue on the bottom. You can see there's slightly different shades of green. So the lighter green are the longer sounds, and the darker green are the short sounds. And also, if you look, the way the vowels are arranged is that if you start with and read along, you've got E, I, U. And look at my mouth when I say that. E, I, U. So my mouth is starting like wide and then going more closed, or like from on a horizontal way. E, I, U. And that's the same in all the rows. E, O. And A, O. Okay, so we're going like that from left to right, and then if we look at going down, we go E, A. So my mouth is widening. So you can see that there's a logic to how they are arranged. That's just with the vowels, and then with the consonants, you've got some of them are in pairs. For example, P and B. Look at my mouth when I'm saying that. P, B. Those two, physically my mouth is the same. The only difference is that one is voiced. So B is voiced. I use my vocal cords, whereas I don't on the P. So there is a logic. So if you don't use the phonetic chart, if you don't use phonetics, it is useful in that way. They are, even if you just sort of explain it to a student, that can help them to understand the differences in the sounds. As I said, I'm going to go back to Tony now. As I said, the most important thing with pronunciation is what you're doing physically. So, for example, a sound that a lot of students that I've worked with have had problems with is the th and th sounds. They often, a lot of students will say d. What is this? Because a lot of people in other languages, they're not accustomed to making that sound. So, and what you need to do to make that sound correctly is stick your tongue out. You need to say th, you need to go th, th, th. And the way you make that sound is by blowing air between the tongue and the teeth. And if you're not sticking your tongue out, if you're not sticking your tongue beneath your teeth, you're not making that sound. You're saying z, z, z. You can't do it. You physically can't make the sound if you don't physically do the right thing. So try to break things down when you're teaching pronunciation to that physical level. What are you actually doing with your tongue, your lips, and your teeth, and your vocal cords? And if you can figure that out, even if you have to sort of think about it right there with the student, that's what pronunciation is all about. I've got one student at the moment, and we discovered that one of his problems was the w sound, and this is because he wasn't starting with his mouth closed. He was sort of starting with it open, going ooh ooh woo ooh ooh, where instead of w w. So just the idea that you need to start with your mouth closed and come out with the sound like that was key, I think, to him improving in that way. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. And I think this is a really big deal, because a lot of times, if you can just pronounce the words as close to a native speaker as possible, people will automatically give you more credit for how much English you know. There's some funny stories. I'm very particular about pronunciation, and what Colin is talking about is really good news, because a lot of times you're told, well, you can't really practice your accent. You just have to let it get better over time. But that's not true, because each of the sounds that we make is tied to very specific motions of your mouth, a place where you put your tongue, where you put your lips, whether you're using your vocal cords or not. And all of this is actually very well laid out, and you can research it, you can look into it. I highly recommend Colin's videos, the English Language Club videos on pronunciation. And if you take the time, you can learn how to make each sound. You just have to learn to put your mouth in the right place. I'm particular about when I trying to learn a language, even if I'm not learning the whole language, I'm just learning a handful of phrases. I really try to work on that pronunciation, to the point where I've literally gone to places where I didn't speak the language, but I had learned how to say, I don't speak French or whatever. And I would, someone would try to talk to me, and I would say, in that language, I don't speak this language. And people would not believe me, because my pronunciation, I'd really practiced the pronunciation of that phrase. And people would argue with me, you clearly speak this language. Talk to me. Why won't you talk to me in this language? But I really didn't know how to say much beyond that. So you really can learn to pronounce words correctly. It just takes learning the actual placement of your tongue and your lips and stuff. And a lot of this information is online. You can find it.
Now, there's a big debate, as in the difference between accent and pronunciation. And I often hear the phrase or teachers offering classes in accent reduction and things like that. And I'm not a fan of I'm not a fan of doing that. I don't like the idea.
No, I agree.
I don't think your accent is something you need to be ashamed of or need to try to get rid of, because you can still have good pronunciation with a foreign accent.
Exactly.
So there's nothing, your identity, your national identity, is absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. When you're speaking English, if you're from another country, it's nice to hear English spoken with different accents.
Oh, absolutely.
As long as we can understand what you're saying, and
Yes.
and so pronunciation and accent are not the same thing.
No,
although
not
there
the
is
same thing.
overlap. There is
overlap, yes.
Yeah.
But you're right. Like you can learn to if you learn to pronounce words correctly so that you can be understood, then the accent is not nearly as much of an issue as the pronunciation. And sometimes people think, okay, well, this person is not pronouncing. A native speaker might hear someone who's learning English and they say, well, they might be mispronouncing those words just because that's part of their accent. But that's not necessarily true. If you're making the right sounds in the right way, you're going to be understood, right? And so if there's differences in your accent, that's not as big a difference. There are some overlap things. For instance, a big part of what people in North America consider the British accent is the fact that the R with a vowel is pronounced a completely different way. Like the correct pronunciation for like the word car in North American English versus British English is not the same. So that's one example where pronunciation and accent are tied together, but most of the things that we connect to these are not necessarily, that you don't necessarily have to tie them together.
Yeah, great. So AJ says, a little off topic, but what is the best way to learn a second language? I mean, that's a hugely broad question. For me, it was living in another country and just being immersed. I mean, my Spanish is not brilliant, and I was over in South America teaching English most of the time. So considering how long I was there, 7 years, my Spanish is not very good at all. But so the more you have to use it, the better, obviously.
Yes.
One of the things I found really effective was actually learning something, like actually learning like a script, writing a script out in English for something to describe myself, to talk about myself, and then just like translating that, and then being able to, because then you have lots of opportunities to say that, to sort of talk about yourself, and by doing that you learn lots of different words and things. So that was one really good way. I don't know, have you got any tips that you have from your experience? And also, let me open this up to everyone else, because everyone watching this is learning English as a second language. What have been the best tips that you've encountered? What are the things that you've done that's been effective?
Yes.
Yeah. Go on, Tony.
Well, I mean, there are some different things for sure, but one thing I would want to point out is the same technique isn't going to work for everybody.
Yeah.
And you should always try more than one. If you try to learn a language, and say, for instance, you're learning it from audio tapes, and it just doesn't work very well for you, don't give up. Try a different method. For instance, if you've been listening to an audio, try something where you can read it, because maybe the visual reinforcement will be better for you. If it's the other way around, if you're trying to read from a book and it's not working, try something that's audio-based. Ideally, videos are great because you can do both audio and visual at the same time. Some people work really well by just memorizing a ton of vocabulary and then muddling through, making sentences. Some people are better. I've been better in the past by learning the core grammar of a language first, and then once you can construct sentences right, then you add on vocabulary as you go. The thing about it is all of those are valid techniques. A lot of people, if they took my approach, start by like learning all the grammar rules. It would just never.
The thing is, though, okay, I would say if you could only learn grammar or vocabulary, it should be vocabulary.
Oh,
because you can communicate with just vocabulary, but you can't communicate with just grammar. So, for example, if you walk into a restaurant and you say table 4, then they know what you mean. They know you'll get what you want. Whereas if you say, please, may we have what do you want? What do you
Please, may we have? Yeah, exactly.
I mean, So
no, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
So the vocabulary is is more, well, I don't want to say it's more
It's
important.
it's more practical in terms
Yes.
of being able to actually use it immediately. In learning grammar is a long-term investment.
Yeah.
It's about taking you from being able to kind of get by to
And I think most
being
people
more.
watching this video, we're speaking in English and presumably everyone can
Yes.
understand us to a certain level. So they must
Yeah,
have a certain amount of vocabulary
for
and
sure.
grammar
Yeah.
already. So we're
Yeah.
already talking to at least intermediate and advanced
Yes.
students. So yeah, I think most people know all this.
For sure. But yeah, just trying multiple different methods is almost always going to
Yeah.
be a good idea until you find something that really works for you.
And when learning Spanish, I was definitely aware of a process of 3 steps where I would first learn something in a kind of academic context, like in a class or in a reading a book, and then I would, once I'd done that, if it stuck, I would start to hear that in conversations that I was just hearing, but maybe on the bus I might hear 2 people and I'd hear, that's the expression that I just learned in my class, and then and it was then once I'd heard other people using it and recognized it that I had the confidence to start using it myself. When you've learned something but you've only learned it academically, I feel like you just don't have it doesn't feel right to use it until you start hearing other people use it. That tells you that, yeah, this is right. And it's interesting how, when you start learning a language, you don't understand anything. None of it means anything. And then you start picking up words here, words there. And then from maybe you only picked out 2 words from a sentence, but that combined with the context, you can make a pretty good guess at what it means. I mean, you're probably familiar, all of you, because as you've learned English, with this process of how it feels. The difference between learning a second language and learning a first language, it's very different.
Yes, for sure.
So, yeah, I think that's something that we can capitalize on, is the way of, learn some concept or some expression, and then start to hear it, and then start to use it.
Yes.
It's definitely.
And so by far the most important element of learning any language is communicating with people who speak that language, if at all possible, natively.
Yeah.
If you're not listening to native speakers, you're not going to pick up on all of those tiny little details. And if you don't have the chance to talk to native speakers, then you won't be able to employ those details. So being able to talk to somebody who speaks the language is key, and it's something you should always be trying to find a way to do.
So you know what? Actually, AJ, I think the best answer to your question, what's the best way to learn a second language, is stay tuned to the English Language Club, because we've got some excellent things coming up. I don't mean right now, today. I mean in over the next few months that we're developing.
Yes.
Right now we're working on this course. Once that's finished and up and running, we're going to do more live streams. We're going to do things on Instagram. We're going to be doing more on the website. There'll be exercises. Like I said, different live streams on pronunciation, grammar. We'll find other things to do. That's my vision for what we're doing here. And like Tony was saying, the best way is to interact with people who speak that language. And English, I want English Language Club to be a place where you can do that. So as well as doing live streams like this, I want to do some Zoom calls where we'll actually be able to see you and hear you. So that will be really, really helpful too. But we're at a really early stage at the moment. We're working really hard, but it's mostly behind the scenes. You're not seeing what we're doing yet, because we're working on this big project
which is why we're doing these live streams, so we can be engaging with you while we're doing all this work behind the scenes.
Keep people up to date. So stay tuned. Make sure you're subscribed. We've got a mailing list. If you go to the website englishlanguageclub.co.uk, you can join the mailing list. You can also join the English Language Club on YouTube, and that will give you access to some behind the scenes videos. things like that. Maybe after this video, I might shoot one. We've got a small handful of members, which is really great. That's another way of supporting us financially to help keep things going and help us to develop these projects that we want to develop. So yeah, stay tuned.
Yes.
Anyway, let's move on because Theo has been asking about slang. I think
slang.
Well, slang or idioms. Slang and idioms. Now, is that the same thing?
No, definitely not the same thing. I don't think.
So, what is the difference between a slang and idiom?
Well, something being idiomatic.
Expressions.
Yeah, idiomatic means that it's kind of unique to that language. It's not grammar. It's not something that people understand because if it's the grammar or the vocabulary, it's just something that you understand as being part of that culture, really.
Yeah.
Slang is a little bit more narrow.
Let's give an example before we go further, just to make it clear. So I think one of the most well-known idioms in English is something like "it's raining cats and dogs." So that's an expression that means it's raining a lot. Obviously, it doesn't literally mean cats and dogs are falling out of the sky. It just means it's raining a lot. I don't know why we say that. It's a strange thing to say, but yeah. But doesn't an idiom mean that we're not using the real meaning of the word?
Yes.
That's how I've sort of understood it. Yeah.
I mean, there's a more narrow definition there as well. Yes. But it means something different from what the actual grammar or vocabulary would say. Whereas a slang is just a lesser used vocabulary, really. It's not distinct from the larger dictionary, but it's just something that not everybody uses. A smaller subset of the population uses. Yeah,
but I mean, idiomatic. I think Theo's asking to sort of learn more idiomatic expressions.
How do you learn idioms? Yeah.
And there's hundreds and thousands of idiomatic expressions. That could be a whole weekly live stream.
For sure.
Where we do just idioms. So maybe we'll do that. In fact, I know there are Instagram accounts completely dedicated to idioms.
Doing idioms,
I mean, this is like the opposite case. Sometimes, like, I can't think of an example. Now I can think of so many. I can't think of one that's appropriate to just single out.
Yeah.
Apart from it's raining cats.
Not a piece of cake. Learning. A piece of cake. Piece of cake means it's easy, right?
Good. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, so any other idioms you can think of? Let's open it up to the audience. Let's see. Falcon something?
Falconal Najar.
Okay. What do you suggest to improve spelling?
Reading.
Spelling.
Oh, there's two things.
Reading.
Yeah.
Yeah, but let's start. But so yes, because phonetics and pronunciation is difficult in English because the spelling is difficult because spelling is inconsistent.
But there are rules. The rules don't follow all the time, but they're really, really helpful, right? And so learning those basic rules, like the rules of phonics, is a really good start on learning to improve your spelling. You'll be surprised by how many words become easy to spell once you have the phonics rules. But really the only way you're going to get good at spelling, aside from just an immense amount of memorization and practice, is to read a lot, because you'll start recognizing the words when you see them.
Yeah. So, and then Cove of Pentagram says, I'm subscribed to the English Club. I'm aiming to become an ESO teacher. May you please recommend a book on English grammar? Cheers from Chile. Well, my favourite book on English grammar is called English Grammar in Use. Trying to think off the top of my head who that's by. Let me look that up. Tony, have you got any favourites?
Not really. There's several that I've used, but every time I've used a book, I've filtered it quite a bit, and I use some things from it, but explain a lot of things in a different way. So it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah.
Though that one is good. English Grammar in Use is a very good one.
Yeah, it's by a guy called Raymond Murphy. So, yeah, that's one I recommend it. So it's good because it's got about 100, over 100 units, and each unit has one page of description and one page of exercises. So it's very good to sort of dip in and out of. It's not sort of book you start from the beginning and go to the end. The way I used to use it is I'd normally be following some sort of other course, and then when I identified a problem, I would dip into the relevant units in English Grammar in Use, just to sort of give a bit more attention to that issue before going back to the course. So that's what I recommend.
See, Arina Olenikova, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, is asking, what is more common for nouns when they're used as verbs with the same writing? Do you change their stress or preserve it? So, for instance, finish, same stress on the first syllable, or to export, changed on second syllable, right? So basically you're asking, if you want to use a noun as a verb, is it safer to change its stress or not to change its stress? What do you think, Colin?
Well, I think it really depends on the word. I don't think the same rule always applies, although it is often the case that the stress moves from one syllable to another, and that changes it from a verb to a noun. But I don't think there's a rule that you can follow that means that's always the case. And you certainly can't change any verb into a noun that way. There's only certain ones.
Though I do think there is a sense that when you do that, it's going to be more like, for instance, if a noun isn't a verb, if there is no verb of a given noun, and I wanted to use it as a verb anyway, which is a thing you can absolutely do in English, that's what I would do to it. Is I would change the stress to make it sound more.
Can you give
like
me an example? Because that's not clear what you mean to me. It's always difficult to think of it.
This is actually something that happens all the time in English. You'll take something, for instance, like the word for it is to verb something. Like I'm going to take a noun and I'm going to verb it. Verb is not a verb itself. It is a noun. When you take a word that is not a verb, and you use it as a verb, that's called you verb the word. That's not really a word in English, but it's something that we do all the time in English. It's not something that you do systematically. It's not part of the grammar. English is just fluid that way. You can take a word and you can kind of use it in an odd context. And so that is maybe one tool that you could use to do that, like changing the stress. It's a very common rule, but it's not universal. So I don't know if we can tell you which one is safer, just because it's not a universal rule. However, I do think it's a good idea. If you're not sure, try it out, because that is often the case. Yeah, that's a very good question. I really like that question.
It's a very difficult question. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So some people are asking me about the English Grammar in Use, asking if I can show the cover. I don't have a copy here, I don't think. But I have just put a link to the Amazon into the description. So if you want to see what that book looks like, you can click on that and it'll show you the book I'm referring to. Any other questions? No, we've got to the end there.
Yes, like record and record. Yes, or an export or to export.
Can any verb be a noun?
any verb can be a noun by definition because you can put it in an ing or an infinitive form.
Yeah.
Like you can use it as a noun. But in English is just so interesting this way. You can use, it's not grammatically correct. English is infamous for this.
Yeah.
That it's totally
you can invent
malleable.
words as you go along.
Yeah,
and
like there's kind of it's a bit of a joke in the expat community in Spanish-speaking countries. Like, for instance, the messenger app WhatsApp. In English, when you want to send someone a message on WhatsApp, you WhatsApp them, right?
Yeah.
The verb is just the name of the app. But in many other languages, it's really hard to do because verbs have a fundamentally different sort of feel to them than nouns do. And in English, we just do it anyway. And there's an extent to which even in that, like the name of the app is WhatsApp.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit more emphasis on the beginning, but when you WhatsApp someone, there's maybe a little bit more emphasis on towards the end of the word. So I think this is a real thing. The idea that when you want to force something to sound like a verb, you emphasize the end of it. But I'm not comfortable saying that it's something you should always do, though I do kind of lean in that direction. Yeah.
And it's almost like when somebody starts a company or a brand, when it's almost like a point of achievement when their brand starts being used as a verb,
Yes, to Google something.
I'll Google you. I'll Google it. Let's Google it. I'll Facebook you. I'll WhatsApp you.
Yes. Though we don't Amazon things.
Well,
we buy them on Amazon, but no one really uses that as a verb by itself, which is kind of surprising. It's a bit of an anomaly, honestly, because
I think
Amazon is
but
everything.
you could though. If I said to you, I'll Amazon it.
I would know.
You know exactly what I'm talking about. You mean I'll buy it on Amazon? Yeah.
This is one of the things I really like about English. There's a few really ancient languages that are like this. Greek authors. There are a few specific Greek authors, ancient Greek from the classical era, who are infamous for just making up new words all the time or using words in a completely different grammatical construct. But in a lot of modern languages, as I understand it, this is actually really difficult. But English just does this all the time, to the point where we get in trouble with this in other languages because people get upset at us.
Yeah. So, I mean, going back to what we were saying about idioms,
yes.
If when you use a word as a verb that isn't technically a verb,
yes,
but you're doing it in a way that people will understand, like saying, "I'll Google it," then that you could say that that's idiomatic because you're not using the word in the literal sense, but you're using it in a way that people will understand.
Yes.
So just to sort of reiterate, that's sort of what idioms are and what idiomatic means.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is part of why idioms are so plentiful in English. I mean, they are in many languages, but again, English just has this fluidity to it, easily kind of shaken up.
Yeah. So we didn't really talk about any idioms specifically, Theo. I think that was what you were kind of getting at. But maybe next week we can come up with a list and
talk about some idioms. Yeah.
Talk some idioms. It's normally good to group them together because you can have idioms referring to the weather, idioms referring to food, idioms referring to how you feel.
Yes. And interestingly, like we started with rigmarole, and that literally was an idiom. People would say, "Oh, this is such a ragman's roll," or "This is such a waste of time." And over time, it has become a word, rigmarole, right? So over time, a lot of these idioms actually do become words to the point where, like, Googling something is now it's in the dictionary. It's an official verb. You don't have to capitalize it anymore because it's a real verb. So there's a lot of words that have kind of the same history, and I'm a big history person, so I enjoy those things.
Yeah. So I'll tell you what. Let's. We haven't set any homework before, but seeing as we've got some, I think we've got enough regular people that we can set some homework. So next week, come with your list of the top 3 or top 5 idioms, top 5 idiomatic expressions that you like or that you've discovered, or if there's some that you're not quite sure what they mean,
absolutely,
and you want to or how to use, then bring those as well, and we'll try to answer your questions. And it'll be great to hear the idioms that you like using, and we'll do the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Well, that's been a great live stream. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you everyone for coming.
As I always do. And if you haven't already, I see we've got 16 likes. But so if you haven't already, I mean, if you've watched this far, you must have liked the video. So please do give us a thumbs up. It really does. It really does help to get noticed. If YouTube sees that lots of people are liking the video, so please give us a thumbs up if you haven't already. We'll really appreciate it. And yeah, let's talk idioms next week.
Sounds good.
We'll see you then.